workers, from all of these people. Now, I've just found I've had 10 minutes, so I really haven't got to the point of what I wanted to say, so I'll have to rush through it in the next few minutes. The real question for us is, what do we do about it? You see, I guess that most of us in this room would agree that this is a rotten system, that something drastic needs to be done in order to change it, and that we need to begin to change it. Because the problem is that people have tried for successive generations to change the world, and they haven't usually, or they haven't succeeded as much as they wanted to succeed. That people 100 years ago thought that building a Labour Party and forming a Labour Party would be the way, that would be the way to achieve socialism. It didn't turn out to be the case. And people have done, time and time again, people thought maybe Russia was the answer, they thought all those things were the answer. And the problem is, one of the things that Marx says about capitalism, he says capitalism is an oppressive and exploitative system. It's also a system that disorganises working people. At one level, it disorganises working people. It makes people feel alienated, it makes them feel cut off from one another, it makes them feel powerless in the face of the big corporations and the boss that they have to go to work every day and all those other kind of things. And therefore, the question of resistance is always one that comes to every generation of people who want to fight back. And it seems to me, well, we are now in a period where we have to look at this question of resistance and how it is that we try to organise to fight back. Now, when you look at this, we have now had this crisis going on for what? When you talk about the mortgage crisis in America, that was what, 3 years ago? 3 years ago, this has been going, at this severe level, this economic crisis has been going on like this. I think the left internationally has pretty much missed the boat over intervening properly in how we can deal with this crisis. In other words, we need a big movement which unites all the different people, whether they're workers or whether they're people who depend on social services or whether they're students or whoever they are. We need a big movement which unites everybody in terms of beginning to organise. And the interesting thing is, you know, when people look back on previous history, they always talk in this country about Margaret Thatcher and the miners and all the things that Margaret Thatcher did in the 1980s. And of course, they're all true and they're all pretty horrific. And those of you who didn't live through them, well, you were lucky, really, not to have lived through them. But it's also true that David Cameron can't really do what Margaret Thatcher has done. He is a much, much weaker Prime Minister. The coalition government is much weaker. Capitalism doesn't have that room to expand. And therefore, there is a real problem in terms of whether or not they can deliver these cuts. The only condition under which they can deliver these cuts is if they make working people pay the price. In other words, if they cut our living standards, if they make us work for more years, if they make us pay more for our council housing, all of these things, if they do all those things, then they'll make us pay the price. The good news is, as well, compared to the 1980s, that there is a big political radicalisation in this country. In other words, there are millions of people who don't like what the government is doing. There are millions of people who didn't like what the Labour government was doing. Now, it seems to me one of the things we have to do is to try to organise some of those people in order to fight back, to build a movement against the recession, to link the issue of the recession to issues like war. I mean, in my view, war is absolutely hardwired into the system. It is not a separate phenomenon, it is absolutely part of the system in which we live. Imperialism is part of the system in which we live. All of these things are things that we have to build these very, very big movements before, in order to fight back against them. But as well as that, we need to do something else. We need to build, in every big movement, if you look in history, there have always been organised groups of people who call themselves socialists, or sometimes they call themselves by some other name. I mean, William Morris, the artist, who was also a socialist, he came to socialism very late in his life, actually, after he'd done a lot of his wallpaper and things like that, but he remained a socialist for the rest of his life. He wrote at one time that people fight and struggle for different things, and then when they get them, they find out they're not really what they thought they were after all. And if you think about the whole history of communism in Eastern Europe, I guess that's a pretty good example of that. So he said, so then you have to start fighting for it under another name. And in a way, what we're having to do is begin to fight as groups of socialists, to give some direction to the movement, to give some politics to the movement, to give some kind of clarity as to what is going on. And, you know, I think it's always very difficult in these circumstances, because lots of people, and some of the people in the room have been in different organisations, or we've been around for a long time, and you try to do things and then sometimes they don't work. And when they don't work, there's nothing worse than, you know, when things don't work and people fall out with each other, and, you know, and maybe they get together a few years later, you know, maybe they don't. But, you know, when those things don't work, it makes people think, well, can socialism work? Can left organisation work? Can we do any of these things? And I think in these periods, it's important to remember two things. Firstly, even if we can't unite in one organisation, we can unite around these issues. I mean, one of the things that we're doing, that we're launching in the next week or two, or some of us have been involved in discussing, is a broad campaign, a coalition of resistance against the cuts and privatisation, which has got people like Tony Benn and Bob Crow and lots and lots of different people on the left who are saying, let's try to unite to stop these things. In the first instance, to have a conference and to discuss how it is we can build this. And I think that is something that everybody on the left can join in, even if they don't like everything else that other people there stand for. So I think it's important we all get stuck into that. But the second thing is that what we're trying to do with Counterfire is something a little bit different. I mean, again, a number of us have been in different organisations, and some of us in the SWP, and we took a decision to leave that earlier this year. And one of the reasons was because we didn't feel that it was committed sufficiently to building the movements, although I think all of us who left took the view that we didn't want to start attacking the SWP or indeed anybody else, because I think the worst thing you can do is like a bad divorce, really. You know, the best thing you can do is kind of walk away rather than get involved in all these things, and it's one of the things that puts people off socialist organisation and socialist ideas. So what we decided to do was to say, okay, we're a relatively small group of people, but we're engaged, we're active, we're involved in the movements, we want to build the movements, and we believe that out of that we can build a socialist current as well. And that's really what we're committed to do. And we hope, you know, we hope that people will join in the discussion tonight and ask questions about what you think it is, or whether you think it's worth doing this. I mean, we have a website rather than a paper, although we may well move towards having other we've got some publications there, because I do believe you do need something that people can actually, you can give to people or sell to people or whatever else when you're on demonstrations or in big meetings. But the idea of the website was also that it would relate to some of the newer movements, to some of the people who do relate to that kind of technology and aren't just looking at what was done 20 or 30 years ago on the left. I think it's very, very important the left keeps up with that. But most importantly, you know, Lenin, who I think was a very great revolutionary, I know he gets a very bad press these days because of what subsequently happened in Russia, but Lenin wrote a very famous little pamphlet called What Is to Be Done, and it seems to me in every period, if you can answer the question, what is to be done, then actually you can build the movement, you can build the confidence in the working class, and you can build socialist ideas within it. That's really what we're trying to do, and we hope with your help that we can be successful. Thank you very much.